Good evening, and welcome to the Reading Empowers event. My name is Dan Carroll, and I'm the Reading Partners National Board Chair. Along with my fellow board members, I'm honored to be in this virtual community with you all this evening. As you can see in the chat box, tonight's attendees are joining us from all across the country, and we're coming together this evening around Reading Partners' central purpose through a conversation about race and educational equity with our honored guest, Jeffrey Blount. I want to thank so many people for their support, but specifically tonight for our board of directors, our volunteers, AmeriCorps members, and our school partners. Many of you have engaged really closely with Reading Partners this fall, either through participation in our regional fundraising events or by logging into our new virtual tutoring platform, Reading Partners Connect. Your support has helped our students during this really critical time, and we're so grateful. I particularly want to acknowledge tonight's sponsors. Walter and Laura Elcock, our dear friends in Dallas, as well as eTherapy, the virtual platform that has launched Reading Partners Connects and has been provided to the organization free as an in-kind donation from our fellow national board member, Harris Larney. This year, as we all know, has been uniquely challenging. We have faced not one, but two simultaneous pandemics, COVID-19 and the systemic racism that persists in our country. Both have deep, immediate, and long-term impacts on our students and families across the nation. Early indicators show that students from systematically disadvantaged backgrounds, including the kids we serve, could lose on average nearly an entire year of learning during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's therefore really important that we do everything possible in partnership with schools and parents to mitigate this learning loss. All of you are part of helping to ensure that our students do not fall through the cracks during this unprecedented time. And all of you are ensuring that the lessons we learned this year set a course for Reading Partners to do even more in the years ahead. I joined Reading Partners 8 years ago, and for two reasons, really, both of which are connected to tonight's topic. First, we know that reading empowers, as is noted by the name of tonight's program. Reading is a critical lever to improving access to opportunities during school, sure, but also throughout your entire life. Reading Partners does just that by bringing together thousands of students and volunteer tutors every year through a tutoring model that's been proven at scale and supported by third-party research. Additionally, Reading Partners' efforts to promote racial equity are core to our mission. Tonight, we're honored to dive more deeply into this work through a conversation with award-winning author and TV producer Jeffrey Blount. So to start us off, I'm proud to introduce our host, Adeola Whitney, Reading Partners' new CEO. Ola Whitney joined our team just a few weeks ago, returning to Reading Partners after 4 years as a leader at iMentor, another outstanding education organization. She's deeply committed as an advocate for racial justice and literacy education. So please join me in welcoming Ola Whitney.
Thank you so much, Dan. Hi, everyone. Good evening or good afternoon, depending upon where you are in the US. I am so grateful for the opportunity to connect with all of you tonight and for the work you have done to support Reading Partners students, especially during this time when literacy is such a vital lever for them. I'm new to this role, but my passion for equity and literacy have been a lifelong commitment. I look forward to sharing a little bit more about my story throughout our program this evening. But for now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Jeffrey Blount. Jeffrey is the award-winning author of 3 novels, including his most recent work, The Emancipation of Evan Walls, winner of the 2019 Reader's Favorite Book Award, the 2019 American Book Fest Best Book Award, and a Shell Unbound 2019 Notable Book Award. He is also an Emmy Award-winning television director. During a 34-year career at NBC News, Jeffrey directed a decade of Meet the Press, The Today Show, NBC Nightly News, and major special events. He has also contributed articles commenting on issues of race and social justice to Huffington Post, The Washington Post, The Griot, and more. He is an award-winning documentary scriptwriter for films and interactives that are on display in the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. Jeffrey is an incredible storyteller, one of the best I've heard. Y'all are in for such a treat. Welcome, Jeffrey. We are absolutely honored to have you with us. And after Jeffrey speaks, we'll begin with some Q&A. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat in YouTube at any time. Jeffrey, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, Ola. Thank you for that kind and generous introduction. Greetings to you all from all over the country. This is such a warm space for an author to be, surrounded by all these people who, like me, respect the power of the written word and the power of education. So let's get busy. 400 years ago, they planted a tree. And someone should have immediately thought better of it and ripped it from the ground before it could take root, before it could grow strong enough to stand firm against an abolitionist wind. But they didn't, because they could look at its fruit and see that one day it would make them rich beyond their wildest dreams. And so what I call the race tree grew, though its trunk, which represents the institution of slavery, would grow crooked and bent and disfigured by disease, a disease that would make it sick and suffer for generation upon generation upon generation, but never put it out of its misery. The disease of inhumanity, the disease of inequality. Now, the race tree, like any other tree, would sprout limbs someday. And those limbs would grow to represent historical inequities in the United States. One limb might represent unequal housing. Another might represent unequal healthcare. Another might represent unequal justice in this land. One of the oldest limbs is so weighted by its inequity that it now rests on the ground. It represents unequal education and unequal access to education. And if we follow that limb all the way back to where it joins the race tree, we find one of the greatest evils ever placed during the time of slavery. And that was the law that made it illegal to teach a slave to learn to read. Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist and former slave, once said that to deny any people an education is one of the greatest crimes against human nature. We know that crime existed, and we know that today we are still trying to recover from it. I want to share a bit of a speech from Virginia Delegate Henry Berry from January of 1832, and he is speaking to his colleagues in the Virginia legislature. And it's about the perpetuation of this crime. Pass as severe laws as you will to keep these unfortunate creatures in ignorance. It is in vain unless you can extinguish that spark of intellect which God has given them. Sir, we have, as far as possible, closed every avenue by which light might enter their minds. We have only to go one step further to extinguish the capacity to see the light, and our work would be completed. They would then be reduced to the level of the beast of the field. In the mid-20th century, the Smithsonian Institution sent out a group of historians, fanned out across the country to find remaining slaves because they wanted to interview them before they passed on. They wanted to get their history, their personal history. They also interviewed family members of those who had been enslaved. And one of these stories represented for me this crime that was committed. And it touched me deeply. It was told by a woman by the name of Tania Stewart. She was 7 years old when this incident occurred in her life. She loved to sit on the front porch in the Mississippi Delta with her great-grandfather, who she called Papa Dallas. Now, she knew that Papa Dallas was blind, but she didn't know what all those other marks were around his face. One day, she got up the nerve to ask him, and she said, "Papa Dallas, what are all those marks on your face?" And he said, "Well, daughter, When I was a slave, I used to go out to the edge of the plantation and hide behind the oak tree. And there I would practice my alphabets in the hopes that one day I could read my Bible. Well, the overseer, he caught me and he pulled me back onto the plantation and he called in all the slaves. And he said, "You darkies know that it is against the law for you to learn to read. And now I'm going to show you what happens when you break that law." Well, daughter, they whooped me and they whooped me and they whooped me and they whooped me. And when that wasn't enough, they burned out my eyes. Now, little 7-year-old Tania did what you would expect of a 7-year-old child in this moment. She burst out in tears. But Papa Dallas said, "Now, daughter, that's not what I need from you. I don't need you to cry for me. What I want you to do is get your hand on every book you can, and I want you to read it from cover to cover. And I want you to read everything you can get your hands on. And I want you to become educated. And along the way, I want you to tell the children my story." So Tania did what was asked of her. She read and read, earned her doctorate, and became a university professor. And there's a reason I think Papa Dallas wanted her to tell his story to the children, because he wanted them to know of his sacrifice and how much he was willing to risk in order to read, because I think he knew that it might not solve everything, the ability to read, but it might be the only way you could have some measure of control over your destiny. It might not solve everything, but it would give you a fighting chance. And this was the ethos that I grew up in my household, and for most of the people, African-American people in my community. It was education, education, education. And we were so proud of the people who were getting their educations and going out and changing the world. I can remember being a young man and hearing the old folks be so excited about this young Black guy, this lawyer who stood up in front of 9 white men in the Supreme Court and argued Brown versus Board of Education and won. Thurgood Marshall. And as you know, he would go on to become the first African-American to sit on that very court. And then I can remember looking at some pictures once and seeing President Lyndon Baines Johnson after he had signed the Civil Rights Act. And he turned around in his chair and he shook the hand of another educated African-American man, a man who had done made a lot of good noise in his time. And I'm going to tell you, speak his name the way my minister used to say it. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He would emphasize the education part. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And for me, I was in the summer, July of 1976. I was so happy. There was a woman that I was so impressed with who was influential to me, even though I'd never met her. Her name was Barbara Jordan, and she was a congresswoman from Texas. And she was going to be the first woman and the first African-American woman to deliver the keynote address at the Democratic National Convention. She was a towering intellect, and she still, as you can tell, has an effect on me today. But it wasn't just the adults who were doing all the good stuff. Right here in my city, Washington, D.C., there's a school called Dunbar High School. And at the turn of the 20th century, well into the 20th century, it was a premier academic high school in the country for African-American students. They regularly outscored the white students in the surrounding schools in the area. And they produced some of the most incredible African-American talent this country has ever seen, including the first 4-star general, the first African-American to sit as a part of the presidential cabinet. And today we continue with those educated stars. The country just elected Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. And there is a Black astronaut, Victor Glover, who is right now at the International Space Station. We can be so proud. But at the same time, we still have a lot of work to do. I just told you about Dunbar and its success. Well, today, we still have problems in our city. Overall, in the Washington, D.C. schools, the graduation rate makes it the lowest graduation rate of all area school systems. And reading proficiency isn't what it should be. So yes, we do have some work to do. And I know that's why you guys are here, and that's what we're going to talk about later. But Kimberly Norwood, who is a professor from Washington University in St. Louis, has done a lot of work in this area. And what she says is stunning, that Black youth are undergoing a crisis of epidemic proportions in education in the United States. She says that some Black kids don't even believe that education is a viable pathway to success. And I ran into that head on one day when I went to speak at a high school in Washington, D.C. I went to speak to 25 African-American students. It was my job as a Black professional to come in and show them that journalism was another path that they could take. And so I provided my bio to the counselor, but I provided also the bio of my two older brothers. I wrote it in a very personal way because I didn't want them to think of me in terms of being, getting a resume like I was sent to an office. I wanted to try to relate to them on a more human level. And so the counselor stood before them and he told them about this bio. He told them about 3 boys who had grown up on a farm and had used education to find some measure of success. And he told them that I had written in the bio that I had believed that those kids, the kids in the classroom in the inner city, could do the same thing that I did with my brothers. And after he finished telling them that, it was my turn to talk. So I got up and stood up in front of the class, ready to deliver, but I was beaten to the punch by a young woman in the classroom. And she just yelled out, "That story can't be true," meaning my story and that of my brothers. I was thunderstruck. I was taken aback and in the moment rendered speechless. And when I didn't speak quickly enough for her, she took it upon herself to let me know with clarity how she felt about the situation. And she said, "You lie." But I hadn't lied. My branch of the Blount family tree came of age in the summer of the spring of 1978. My parents, my older brother and myself, we sat in this beautifully ornate room on the campus of William and Mary College in Williamsburg, Virginia. We were the only Black family in the room. And we were there to celebrate the very best. The kids who were seniors, who were academic stars, who had done so well, such powerful intellects that they were about to be inducted into the nation's oldest and most respected honor society, Phi Beta Kappa. Now there was a woman sitting in front of us and she kept turning around and looking at us. And every time she turned, she seemed to be more and more angry that this Black family was there. Our presence seemed to be ruining her day and she couldn't figure out why we were there. Well, she stopped turning around, although I wish she continued to turn around because I wanted to see her face. When the door opened and the first academic star by virtue of his last name to come through the door was my brother, Brian. Now I can understand why that woman and probably many other people in the group didn't think we belonged. My father, R. Edward Blount, was a farmer, the oldest of 9 kids, grew up in a farming family, stayed a farmer. He was a very smart high school student, but college was not to be. My mother, Doris Delk Blount, grew up in Philadelphia, city girl, and she was also very smart. but college was also not to be for her. They met and got married and moved down to the farm in Smithfield. And they made a promise to each other. They said that when they had children, their children would have the education that had eluded them. And so we fast forward a few years and there are 3 boys in the house, and my parents are in the game. They are providing us with the proper role model for sure. They joined the PTA. My dad became president of the PTA. They went to every parent-teachers conference. If there was money needed to be raised, they raised their hand to go help raise the money. If there was a project on the campus that needed fixing, they raised their hand and they were the parents there to help do the fixing. They were trying to let us know that they were part of this education infrastructure and they believed in it and they wanted us to take part in it. And at home, they believed in us and they showed us that. They made themselves available for us. Whenever we were doing homework, they were somewhere nearby and they would stand in when we needed help. And if they felt that there was something missing in the curriculum at school, they tried to fill that at home. There was a time when my father said, boys, you know, it's getting to the point where your mom and I can't keep up with you. When it comes to the math and sciences you're doing, you're going to have to help each other. We were already ahead of the game. We were unfailing advocates for each other. And I benefited the most being the youngest, but we helped each other as much as we could. In fact, my older brother, who was away at college studying physics, came all the way home in the middle of the week to tutor me and my 2 friends on the night before we were supposed to have a big high school physics test. My mother went back to school and we rallied around her. I can remember sitting in a room doing my homework with my mom in the room doing her homework. And my father, he looked at all of this and he said, you know what, the farm's not going to be enough financially. So he had gone to work at a meatpacking plant to bolster the family income. He'd work on the farm during the day and the meatpacking plant at night. How could we not believe in this dream of education? In fact, when my older brother Richard was a senior, one of his classmates said to him, hey, Richard, are you going to go to college next year? And Richard was baffled by the question, and he responded by saying, you mean there's another option? Not in our household. And on that day in 1978 at the College of William and Mary, we were seeing Brian's college career come to a close. He had gotten his Phi Beta Kappa ring. And after the program, we as a family stood with 2 members of the Phi Beta Kappa Society. And they congratulated Brian and they were congratulating us. And they didn't really know how to relate to us or even what to call us. So they got the point across when they said, Mr. and Mrs. Blount, we just want you to know that Brian is the first of his kind to achieve this goal. At the school where Phi Beta Kappa began, at the 2nd oldest college in the United States. Years from then, my daughter Julia would apply to the College of William and Mary. And when she got in, she went to Accepted Students Day. And when she arrived, they handed her and the group of kids who were there a brochure. And on it was a story of her uncle's accomplishment at the College of William and Mary. And yes, you could say it was a proud day for Julia. Julia's uncle Brian would one day grow to be a world-renowned theologian. He got his PhD. He is the author of some 15 books, many of those award winners. And he resides as the first African-American president of Union Presbyterian Seminary in Richmond, Virginia. My oldest brother, Richard, graduated with that physics degree, became a nuclear engineer, and at one time was the only African-American in charge of and running a nuclear power plant in the United States, the Surrey Nuclear Power Plant in Virginia. And as you heard, I worked at NBC for quite a while. And at some point, I became the first African-American to direct the Today Show. Many, many years from that day at William and Mary, Julia was getting ready to go to college. Jean and I put her in the car and drove her off to start her freshman year. And after getting her settled, I left Jean and Julia in the room with Julia's roommate and her parents. I needed to find a quiet space for me. And when I found it, I called my parents home in Smithfield, Virginia, back on the farm. And my mom answered. And I said, "Mama, do you know where I am right now?" And she said, "No." I said, "I am standing on the grounds of Princeton University." I said, "You know that dream you and Daddy had? You worked so hard. You stayed the course. You fought the good fight, and you taught us well. And now you have made it to the Ivy League." She cried, and so did I. But you know, I was able to tell that girl in the classroom who said I lied that I had told her the truth. And I used a computer. I had the kids in the room call up my brother's seminary, had them Google it, and go to that beautifully designed president's page where she could read about the truth, the things that I had told her, and even more. And I said to them, you know, my parents were always telling us that no one was better than us. No one could give a greater effort than us. And that we would be successful if we believed that. And I told the kids the same thing, that they could do it the same way that we had. Now, I've often told this story, and within the first 5 responses, I usually get someone to say, well, you know, that's a beautiful story, that's all nice, but you had 2 parents who loved you and supported you. Most kids, not most kids, a lot of kids don't have that. And I say, you know what, you're absolutely right, I agree with you. But we don't always just do studies on the things that go wrong. We do studies on the things that go right, because they give us a roadmap to success. And I tell my parents' story as much as it is mine and my brother's, and especially my brother Brian's, because I believe their dedication and love and faith and staying in the game with their children every step of the way is a roadmap for success via education. They believed in education. But I do affirm that statement from people. I do say, of course it's true. There's so many kids who fall through the cracks. We are still fighting, trying to revive, trying to become stronger and fight off that crime that happened back in slavery. When COVID started, Jean and I were watching the news, and we saw this story of these 2 sisters who had gotten their school-issued laptops, but they had no Wi-Fi. So they were at a Taco Bell in the parking lot using their Wi-Fi. I know that there are kids who are born into families where education is not the priority, and there just isn't time to make it the priority. There are so many different ways where there is a lack of education equity happening in this country. But you know what? This is where the village comes in. And this is what has been so impressive to me about Reading Partners. I did my research, you know, I was a journalism student, so I did my research. And what I saw, you know, frankly, has amazed me. The amount of dedication, patience, and love from the folks at Reading Partners to their young partners is amazing. I love the fact that there's so many people who've been moved to give, to donate, because you help create an infrastructure for the books, the technology, the places. You give space for the tutors to do their wonderful job. And you tutors, you're like miracle workers, and I know you know where the title comes from. But you do give them something even more than just ability to read. Of course, that's where we start. But we know what reading brings along. I can testify to that, being a first-generation college student who knows that he owes so much of his success to education. And that's what you give them. The relationship that you build with them also gives them something special, because they can see right in front of them success. They can touch success. And when they can touch success, they can believe in success. Now, I know Dan and Ola are going to speak to you later about, some of the breakdown, some of the way the organization works, and what they have to give to kids and what you can give to the organization to help it work. Jean and I have already given. And I believe so much in what I've read that I have written reading partners into my next manuscript for my next book, which means I am very, very thankful for the work that you are doing. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch for me to say that if Papa Dallas were here today, he would say that he is very thankful for what you are doing as well. Keep up the good work. Thank you, guys.
Jeffrey, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. And as I have heard, stories are a gift, and you gave us many gifts this evening. This is not the first time I've heard the story of Papa Dallas or about you and your brothers growing up, but every time I hear it, it's like I've heard it for the first time. Thank you so very much. We also have a number of questions that came in before the evening started, as well as some questions that people, I think, are now putting into the chat.
Okay.
I'd first like to start with a question that was submitted in advance. So many who are here with us tonight, Jeffrey, have either read your book or are currently reading The Emancipation of Evan Walls. Can you tell us about Evan Walls and give us a summary of his story?
Evan Walls begins with Evan as an adult. He and his wife have just had their first child, and he is frightened by the fact that, or that he is afraid that his daughter will grow up to suffer the same kind of isolation and bullying and so forth that he did. He hasn't told his wife about the most intimate parts of that experience for him. She talks him into telling her, and that provides a story of Evan's life. And we go back to when 1968, when he's 10, he, like Tania Stewart, loves sitting on the porch, sitting at the feet of the old people and listening to them talk. And he gets inspired by a gentleman who is talking about how the African Americans in that town, about to go into integration, needed to step up and stand up behind their kids. Young Evan stands up on the porch and says, I want that. I want to go to school. I don't care who I go to school with. I want that success. And he had no idea that at 10 years old, that proclamation was going to put him on a road between two very different cultures and a very painful experience. On one side, he's the uppity N-word, which he would have expected in 1968 as an African-American kid, but he would not have expected to have that same kind of vitriol come to him through his own community, where he would have to prove his blackness over and over and over again. And by the time we get to the end of the book, we find a little bit more whole Evan, but an Evan who had some information that is very important for you to know about how we can, about the things that we can do to each other. It's about the issue of acting white, but it's also about the overall issue of systemic racism and inequality in education that leads to this story. Evan Walls' story would not be in existence if it were not for systemic racism.
That's right. Thank you for that. We know that our kids at Reading Partners and other kids throughout this country who are facing systemic racism due to education are tremendously resilient. That their families have a strong sense of community and trust, and that they want to learn and deserve to learn, right? And that they're loved. And I think you talked a little bit earlier about sometimes people having a lack of resources, but not a lack of love. And so in a previous talk you shared, and I quote, "The world is waiting for the important gift that you have to bring to the table." What advice would you give to the younger generation about how to overcome the most difficult challenges when dealing with racial justice and educational equity in the United States?
Well, the first thing I would say is, and I know I'll start here. I know from talking to my own kids, sometimes they want to start with the I want to fight part first, but I'm going to start with the education part first. I always speak to that because in order to become a Kamala Harris and get yourself in a position where you can make change, you need that education. It does not mean you can't fight for your rights at the same time. Both my kids have done that. But in order to make change and create the change that I spoke of when I talked about Thurgood Marshall, Martin Luther King, Barbara Jordan, and education is so important. So by all means, the first thing you do is to provide yourself a base from which you can, you can fight for the right things. And then pick your battles. The most important thing is that you become educated as a child. And the other thing I say is that find a mentor. Every child needs a mentor. And if you can't find it at home, there is a teacher willing to do that for you, to someone to go to when you need that guidance. And in the book, Evan Walls, you will find that mentorship is huge in Evan's ability to go on with his life. So seek mentorship, put your education first, because that is going to give you the base from which you can make the kinds of changes you want. And along the way, take on the battles that you can.
That's wonderful. Thank you. When and how did you decide to go down this path in your career? And why do you think this is important to continue to stay in this space and promote social justice narratives?
Well, I grew up in a Southern town. I made my way through that with the help of my parents and brothers. So from a child, I've understood that there was a grander battle going on for social justice and the rights of African Americans, and now people of color, other groups of people of color who are fighting for that. Also, getting into a position, frankly, where I was the only Black director at NBC News for some 20 years, and having to fight for things that came much easier to other people in those positions. Doing stories and seeing African Americans who were disadvantaged by so many different things and had no voice. And so that's why I started writing. That's why I started doing op-eds. That's why I started speaking, because my mother used to say, one good thing you can do is talk. So I do a lot of talking and I do a lot of writing, and where I can, I affect change. But those sort of things, it just kind of grew over my lifetime until I hit NBC and had my own real obstacles to overcome, which made me even more aware of the greater obstacles that people were overcome. I keep saying that, being African American is the greatest and most constant conflict in my life. Yeah. And it is for other people. And I want to be an assistance in any way I can in making and helping folks be successful.
I love that. There are a number of questions coming up in the chat too, Jeffrey. There's one about parent engagement and involvement, which reads, what strategies can we use to emit a culture of parent involvement in the household?
Well, I think one of the things we need to do for the children and for families, particularly those who are having a struggle, when they say kids become what they see, families see in their kids what they can see.
That's right.
So the same thing, parents oftentimes aren't in a neighborhood where there are doctors and teachers down the street. That's not what they see. So we have to, as a community, and I'm not just talking about Black people, I'm talking about the educational community. Yes. We have to normalize Black educational success. So when you go into a high school, it shouldn't just be the trophies of the football players. It should be the guy who is the astronaut now on the space station. And so when kids are seeing that and parents are seeing that, they can dream a different dream for their children. And so I've had so many conversations with people, especially on the road with the book with Evan Walls, where this seems to be the case. I was kind of floored by the amount of conversation around that space. So let's normalize education, and make the education success, the people who are having success, stars, so that the children and the parents can see that and be motivated by that. Because there are a lot of parents who have the love and who just don't know how to get started.
Yes. There's another question. You talked a bit about systemic racism, and I just saw a question come up asking, let me just see it. What did it go away? What is one thing that you would do? And I'm going to paraphrase, so please pardon me for the person who asked the question, but what is one thing that you would do to mitigate, reduce, or eliminate systemic racism that students face in education today?
Well, that's a difficult one. So 2017 to 2018, 80% of public school teachers were white. And if we all agree, and I agree that I feel like all of us have implicit biases. So the kids of color are in a situation where the majority of the teachers don't have their same experience. And so the kids need to we need to provide more of that experience. We need to have more people who are told that it's a good thing to go into education. And we need to have our kids be a part of that. So that's, again, one way of dealing with the systemic racism in the schools, is making sure that the folks who are in front of our kids are educated properly and who recognize those kids, the possibilities for those kids. So many African-American kids, and particularly males, teachers look at them and automatically assume that they are not qualified to do the work. And that is something that has to stop. We have to have more people of color in positions of power in schools and on school boards and where you are. I'm so happy to see you sitting in the seat you are as CEO, able to affect change. These are the kinds of things that I think are appropriate to help fight that. And also, we have to get more people in the game. So if we want to affect change, we need more Kamala Harrises. That's right. We need more Keisha Lance Bottoms. And so we have to, as a community, grow those people. We have to think of this as a long game. We have to affect change, and it doesn't grow the change in the people who are there, who are going to make that change for us.
Yes. You're getting a lot of love in the chats and chat box, and people are agreeing about what you're saying regarding mentorship, about parent involvement, about starting at home and creating a culture of learning. So I think people are definitely picking up what you're putting down.
And can I say that I think that is, for me, if there is a chance, is the most important thing. Yes. There's a picture of me with my daughter, Julia, who was home from the hospital maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And my wife took this picture. She's still teasing me about it. I'm reading The Cat in the Hat to like a 3-month-old baby. But the point was, I just wanted her to hear words and appropriate literature, if that's what I'm getting at. And we wanted to establish that culture from the moment that they grew up, the moment they could recognize what was happening, that learning was a part of their life. One of the great stories that we have in our family is when Julia was about 7 or 8, she'd done something great at school. And we took her up to the Treetop Toys, a toy store near us, and it had books and toys. And we walked in and we said, Julia, pick what you want, because what she'd done was pretty incredible. And she went and she got 2 books, and Jean and I looked at each other and went, and so setting the tone is such an important thing. And I learned that from my parents. They taught me that, and they taught that to my brothers too. And we parented in the same way.
Yes. You talked a bit about representation, and not representation simply for representation's sake, but finding qualified people that are diverse, right? And so there was a question in the chat about, choosing someone simply because of the color of their skin and not their qualifications is racism, or isn't that racism? And I don't think that's at all what you were saying.
No.
And so perhaps for that person in the chat that may not have understood what you were saying about representation and the importance of diversification at a CEO level, at a director of NBC like yourself level, just at various levels and in all industries, not including education. Can you just talk a little bit more about that to help clarify what you were saying?
Well, yeah, I want representation, and I want qualified representation.
That's right.
But I also want people to get rid of the affinity bias. So we have, when we look at the number of Black CEOs in the country, it's a handful. We look at the number of people in running schools and so forth and so on. There's just not a whole lot of people. So we want more people, and there are people out there who are qualified to do the job. We
Right.
have to have people who are in charge say, oh, this time I'm not going to look for the person who looks like me all the time. I'm going to broaden my horizon and do that. I saw a TED speech by a woman professional who realized at a certain point that she was favoring the men and that she wasn't creating enough representation of women in her workplace. So that is what I'm talking about. We need to recognize that we have children of all races in this country, and they should see representation of themselves. And every organization should work hard to do that because it only uplifts everybody.
That's right.
You know, when everybody else becomes trouble, we're going to have to go in and help anyway. How about let's help them do it the right way and learn and put people in front of them that can make a difference in their lives.
Thank you for that. I'm going to close out with this question. So you previously stated your longtime discomfort with the Washington NFL football team, former mascot, the Redskins. And as you called to action the players, many of whom are BIPOC or Black, Indigenous people of color, to not be silent, reminding them that their silence was to be complicit, stating, and I quote, "We know the pain of justice denied and its ramifications." What similar call to action do you have for people on this call who come from a variety of different backgrounds to use their voice and their influence to stand up for our students of color who are increasingly marginalized during this time?
First of all, I would say thank you for joining us. And by the fact that you self-selected yourself in here says to me that you want to do something to help this situation. And that's the first step. And then educate yourself about the issues that are facing these kids. And that includes African Americans too, because a lot of people I found don't know about the Evans situation that I write about in the book. Educate yourself about the problems in the community, in the education community, in whatever community you're in. And, there are books to read about that too. And then choose to make a difference because it's coming back to you one way or another. You're going to have to care for people one way or another. Choose to make a difference. One of the, I can't remember, but the UN's mission was something like, all of us is born free and equal and with dignity and rights. So we need to get on board with that. And we need to recognize that particularly our children coming up need everybody who is on this call, who is willing and caring for those children to have the kind of success that is possible when they have people in their lives, to get in their lives and offer that kind of help.
Jeffrey, thank you so much. This has been incredible. Community, don't go anywhere. We're not done yet. But I also want to thank all of you for the great questions. And as I said earlier, there was just also chatter going on, generative conversation in the chat. That was amazing to see. And I'm just so glad that this community is really coming together to talk about race and educational equity. Thanks again, Jeffrey.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're so happy to have you. And I am so happy and so honored to be CEO of Reading Partners. I do this work because I'm deeply passionate about literacy as a means of social justice. I was taught at an early age that leaders use their voice and their influence to advocate for others, especially those who cannot do so for themselves. At 12 years old, while living in Columbus, Ohio, I witnessed a situation that would forever impact me and change the trajectory of my life. It was a hot, sunny day in August, and I was so excited to go back to school shopping with my parents at our local mall. As we departed JCPenney's, I saw two mall security guards violently throw down a pregnant Black woman, nearly full term, to the ground on her belly. My father immediately ran over to them and intervened. And my memory is fuzzy on certain aspects, but what I distinctly remember is the pained look on that woman's face as she was being harassed for an accusation of petty theft, coupled with the look of determination on my father's face, who had no relation to this woman, but stood up and fought on her behalf. Micro and macroaggressions were thrown his way by the guards. But my father never lost his composure. He stood firmly by a stranger's side when he saw her mistreated. He later dedicated the front page of the local minority-owned newspaper, for which he was editor, to tell her story. Speaking up and amplifying the voices of people who are systemically marginalized is the meaning of social justice to me. I do this work because I am committed to our Reading Partners students as much as my father was committed to the pregnant woman he did not know, but saw humanity in. We cannot ignore how deeply rooted and pervasive systemic racism and injustices continue to affect the communities where Reading Partners works. Reading is a fundamental right. And tonight I invite each of you to consider your role in ensuring every student has access to this right. Inequity is only amplified in times of crisis. Equity issues that plagued young students and their families pre-pandemic have only worsened. As Dan mentioned earlier, recent data trends indicate that without additional support, the students we serve, in addition to 9 million elementary age students nationwide, could enter the 2021-22 school year having fallen almost an entire grade level further behind in reading. Comparatively, their more affluent peers are projected to fall approximately a half a year behind. This is a unique time, and we have a unique opportunity. My vision for Reading Partners is for us to become leaders in educational equity, leveraging our proven model to narrow the literacy gap among young students in marginalized communities. Perhaps, and most importantly, my vision is not that Reading Partners is doing this work to a community or for a community, but rather with the communities we serve. By working with our schools who we partner with and our volunteers from the community, we will strive to dismantle systemic barriers in education to collectively bring about catalytic change. We will do this by centering innovation and using our 21 years success record to help our students reach their full potential. This year is something we've never seen in our lifetimes. The loss in literacy and education that our students will experience means our collective work is more important than ever. Whether you're a tutor who dedicates at least an hour weekly to support our students, a donor who's previously invested in Reading Partners or is planning to do so in the future, or someone who heard about Reading Partners from a friend or family member, we need every single one of you on this call. We need you in a way we've never needed you before. I'm asking you to take one additional step. I ask you to give your time, give your financial resources, introduce us to others that care about this work. Join me and our community of incredible AmeriCorps members, community volunteers, and staff. Together, we can deepen Reading Partners' impact for the years ahead. The challenges posed by 2020, while daunting to say the least, certainly cannot stop us. I invite each of you to join me in investing in the education of our youngest generation of leaders, scholars, and innovators. And I know you're wondering, how do I do that? Well, I'm going to pass it over to Dan, who's going to talk a bit more. Thank you so much. Dan, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Ola. So in the time we have left, it's my honor to share with you how we can take that inspiring vision you just heard from Ola and make it a reality in the years to come. As you've heard, there's a real need for your partnership to make the kind of literacy education that we're trying to pursue accessible. And over the last 9 months, Reading Partners has evolved at a pace that none of us thought possible and none of us have seen before, with the goal of ensuring that our students continue to learn through the COVID-19 crisis and beyond. So tonight, I'm asking you as well to join our nationwide movement to provide the thousands of children across the country the opportunity to learn to read. So many of you who are here today have already attended a regional event in Colorado, the Twin Cities, South Carolina, or Seattle, and generous donors from those events have already contributed $300,000 to support our students. So for those of you who've made donations at these events, thank you. Thank you for your commitment. But tonight's program is really about building connections. You're already connected to Reading Partners, whether you're here because you were invited by a friend or a colleague who's as passionate about our mission as we all are, or whether you're a tutor or a current supporter. So it's my privilege and my ask tonight to ask you to deepen that connection by making a financial investment that demonstrates your commitment to educational equity. Listen to this, because we can't ask you to do something we're not doing. Our national board members have already made a generous combined gift of $200,000 to support Reading Partners' work. This will go a long way towards our goal of providing more students with literacy tutoring and to fight the systems of educational inequity that hold too many of our students behind, especially during this global COVID pandemic. So thank you to those generous donors who've already begun making donations. And as board chair of Reading Partners, I want to personally invite everyone here to join us in reaching our $300,000 goal tonight. As you can see in our giving levels, which are up now, each donation has a significant impact on individual students at every level this year and every year in the future. So this is traditionally this event marks the start of our year-end fundraising season. Throughout the rest of this year, Reading Partners will continue to share how reading empowers and inspires students to learn, grow, and change the world. So you can visit readingpartners.org and click the donate button, or use the link in the description section on your screen tonight. It's fast, it's simple, and you'll be able to select whether you'd like to support Reading Partners in a local region or nationwide, or both. As we know, the effects of this pandemic are going to be felt for years to come. That's why my family and I have made a multi-year pledge as members of the Literacy Champion Society, so this essential organization, this Reading Partners, has the sustained funding to continue serving students no matter what happens in the years ahead. So I invite you to consider the same for a monthly donation or a multi-year pledge, whichever you prefer. The details to how to do that can also be found on our donation page. So as we take a few moments for you to make your donation, we're going to hear now from our most powerful stakeholders, our students, our volunteers, and educators, in a video that highlights the innovative Reading Partners Connects program. Please know that for whatever you give to Reading Partners, including the gift of your time, we sincerely appreciate your support. We are all Reading Partners. And now I'll give you a few minutes to make your gifts. Say action.
Action. Every time I used to come to Reading Partners, I used to be confused of what we're learning about, but now I know what we're learning about and what our lessons are. I feel more confident now than I used to, and that made me feel proud.
I think Reading Partners is about to learn how to read and just help kids.
I was so excited to get involved with Reading Partners because reading is the road to learning. The stronger our reading skills are at the onset, the better learners will be for our whole lives long.
One thing I was a little bit nervous about was in this virtual world, where does Reading Partners fit in? So I was so excited to hear that Reading Partners has already completely transformed to a virtual program. The kids are able to still meet with their tutors one-on-one. They're still going to be able to see their tutor face-to-face. They're still going to be able to ask them about their lives. They're still going to be able to build that love for reading and learning together.
I was just so impressed at how quickly Reading Partners made the pivot from the Reading Center to Reading Partners Connects.
It feels like you're at school, but you're actually at home.
Can you tell me about your tutor, Miss Lorianne?
Yes, she is super duper 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 nice.
I have the most delightful reading partner. He's just so engaged and so motivated. Even when he struggles, he says, this is hard, but I gotta do it. So every day with him really is a delight. And I think that that personal connection helps us connect on the learning journey as well.
The kids feel like our reading partners care about them. They ask about how they're doing. They ask about their families. they're invested in our kids' lives.
Reading partners helped me more on my other classes because I'm understanding what I'm reading. I like to read now.
Sometimes they pause and just ask me some questions, and then I have to answer them. If I don't know the word, they say sound it out.
As a matter of fact, he has said, this is hard, but reading's important. How great is that to have that be your scholar's approach to reading? It's hard, but I know it's important.
One of the best things that we're seeing is that students with reading partners are not only seeing academic gains, but also social emotional gains.
I hope we can use Reading Partner Connects when we return to schools. I hope that we can take the best of the online version and use it in the reading centers.
All the tutors are nice and everyone's nice.
He said to me one day, I really would like to see you face to face, but at least I can see your face.
Our event is coming to a close, but the donate page will remain open. And if you haven't already, please consider making a donation, either in the link below or directly through our website. Thank you. Thank you to this inspiring community for joining us in supporting the critical work of ensuring that every child has access to reading support so they become lifelong readers, lovers of learning, and empowered to change our world. We could not do this work without you, so thanks.